On the phone, it's a pleasure to welcome to the program Joan Fitzgerald, professor of urban and public policy at the School for Public Policy and Urban Affairs at Northeastern University. And we are talking about the piece in the American Prospect, Why Markets Can't Price the Priceless. Welcome to the program, Joan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So your piece about why we cannot price, ultimately, water, or why, in and of itself, the market cannot set the price for water, struck me as very timely for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, obviously, we talk quite a bit about the idea of the free market being able to do things more efficiently than government on this program. We find that in many aspects it's horribly lacking to the extent that a free market actually exists. But beyond that, too, water is increasingly becoming a real problem. Massive drought out in California, and it is becoming more and more of a problem. So tell us where water is a problem and in what way.
Well, one of the things we know about climate change is that dry areas are going to get drier, wet areas are going to get wetter. And what we need to do in that environment is price water correctly, but for different reasons. So just to clarify, I didn't say that we shouldn't price water, but I said I don't think we need to privatize the provision of water. And so the two examples I cited were two of the extremes. One in Las Vegas, where the water authority had various programs. So in urban policy, we call them carrots and sticks. So programs to help people consume less water, or businesses consume less water, incentives for them to do that, but then pricing mechanisms so that rather than the more you use, it gets cheaper, the more you use, it gets more expensive. So that's kind of the strategy the pricing strategy that's embraced around using less water. The example I used on pricing in the article is on Philadelphia, which, like many East Coast cities, has the problem of having to meet stormwater management requirements, not putting water into streams, oceans, lakes, waterways. And
I want to make that distinction because I found that really interesting. I wasn't sort of like aware of that potential dilemma. So you have southwestern cities and I guess West Coast or western cities where you've got a lack of water, and then East Coast cities where you've got too much, and that brings us to Philadelphia. I mean, just tell us about that notion of runoff, because I just assumed, I guess, well, it rains a lot, and it'll go in the sewer, and that's it. That's the end of the story, but it's not.
Yeah, well, it's not too much water per se, but it's in the entire Northeast, the amount of rainwater. So not only the number of storms, so we have the frequency of storms and the severity of storms increasing. Okay, and many of our older cities have, in a good majority of their area, what's called a combined water and sewer system. So what happens? All the water from your housing and businesses goes into that sewer system, but so does all the rainwater in those areas. And then what happens when you get a flooding event, a Hurricane Sandy, a prolonged rain, it backs up. The system can't handle it. So there's two ways you can solve that problem. One is build more what's called gray infrastructure, and that is you just pipe it away. And that's what we've done for almost a century. And we're finding that it's not effective, but it still backs up a lot of water into people's houses, into riverways. So the Clean Water Act makes cities stop doing that in terms of pollution. So you can either build a bigger tunnel underground, or you can start working with green infrastructure, which is what Philadelphia did. But that was accompanied, just like Las Vegas, it wasn't just one measure, there was pricing. And similarly in Philadelphia. So how water is traditionally priced is based on how much you use. And that does not cover the cost of maintaining the system. And so what happens is all that stormwater, nobody's paying for it. So Philadelphia it wasn't the first city, but it was the first city that did it as extensively, started charging people by the amount of impervious surface. So essentially the amount of stormwater runoff that their property created. And so that was the stick, because people, businesses who hadn't been charged before, say you've got a Walmart, you've got that huge parking lot creating all kinds of runoff, but you're only paying a very small water bill for whatever is used in the store. So that's a big stick, but they created these programs where if the businesses made investments in green infrastructure to handle their stormwater, then their bill was reduced by the amount they did.
So we have a sort of a classic case of looking to, and we're talking mostly about sort of corporations in this situation, right? Because your average homeowner doesn't have a huge plot of land that's paved over for no reason. Water gets absorbed into the ground more. But this is paying for that externality. Your parking lot will tax, and by that I mean put pressure on the water infrastructure that we all have to pay with our tax dollars, and you're getting a free ride there, basically.
Exactly. And but it's interesting. You mentioned the residential uses. So one of the things that they want to do is have people use rain barrels more on their property. Well, the zoning code prevented that. Because all, runoff had to go directly into the sewer. So what Philadelphia found was they had to change zoning regulations. A lot of things had to change in their systems, regulatory systems, to accommodate this green infrastructure. But it's the first city in the country that's attempting to meet these EPA guidelines, Clean Water Act guidelines, completely with green infrastructure mechanisms.
And how is that working? I mean, are we seeing the Walmarts repaving? I guess that's what's involved, right? They repave the parking lot with something that will is somewhat permeable, and so water can drip into it. Is that it?
That's one green stormwater technique, to replace with permeable pavement where it's possible. There's bioswales, where you build natural areas where they're just gardens, but then they can fill up with water and gradually drain, as the stormwater recedes. So there's those. There's rain barrels. There's various canals that can be put in parks. And it's a real experiment. They're using all kinds of different techniques and monitoring what they're doing. And for the most part, they've got their Department of Parks on board, their Department of Streets on board, and I think we'll see more cities in the country looking to Philadelphia. Portland, Oregon is another leader in this regard, to see how they're doing it without building this huge gray infrastructure system. And, Boston, from what you said earlier, one of the problems we have is the whole Back Bay, a good chunk of our city is landfill.
Total landfill, yes.
Yeah, and so one of the things that's happening when you have a gray pipe infrastructure, the water doesn't rejuvenate that area, and so it's all built on pilings. Those pilings get exposed, and once they're exposed, they start to rot. And so you want to have a system where that water, rather than going through pipes to a main source, treatment source, is actually recirculating to revive the water table.
All right. So before we get to the privatization and it being problematic, if I hear what you're saying correctly, on both ends of this, both when we're talking about basically making people account for the runoff that they create, and in the cost for water almost becoming sort of following the model of progressive taxation, right? I mean, this is it's really just basically saying we're exposing the hidden costs that we have been picking up as a society for you, and now you're going to have to pay for it.
Right.
And
yeah, that's right.
And
And
why?
there was some objection, as you can imagine, at
Yeah,
first, and that's why they created these programs to help them change, change what they were doing.
why do you think that is it or maybe it isn't easier? But I mean, there seems to me to be so many other areas in which we could extend these principles, right? I mean, from like a myriad of the entire carbon fuel industry seems to be basically getting a free ride where society picks up the cost of externalities, not
Absolutely.
not the least of which is climate change. But we see examples like this time and time again. Why do you think it's been effective in the realm of water?
Why has it been effective in water?
Yeah, why is it that we've been able to sort of impose these principles in the area of dealing with water in this one part of our infrastructure, but we seem to have so much more problems doing it in other parts of our society?
Well, for starters, I wouldn't say we've been doing it with water. This is, one of a handful of cities in the country that's experimenting with this. And it wasn't exactly well received in the beginning because we are used to water as, it's the lowest utility we have, thinking of it as almost a free good and entitlement. I think what we see in the East Coast, though, is that realization that we're in big trouble in terms of, I think Hurricane Sandy was a monumental event. I know in Boston, everyone says, but for a few hours, we would have been high tide as well and would have had these problems. So I think there is a sense of urgency. So unlike, carbon emissions, which, is it from this coal plant, is it from this natural gas, water we experience on a day-to-day basis. And so I think it's easier for people to make that connection. They saw what happened with Sandy. They saw what happened in Boston. Look at Norfolk, Virginia. Look at Miami. I mean, people are seeing the effects of this on a day-to-day basis. And so there's a strong realization we have to do something differently.
Indeed, not so much in Miami, though it seems to me. But where you have a governor who won't allow the word climate change, but that's not going to stem the water. All right. Well, let's talk about privatization. I mean, give us some examples of where you cite Atlanta, where water privatization has been a failure. What happened with Atlanta?
Well, what happened is they don't make the investments. I mean, there's not that much room because unless you're going to really raise the price, which you can't do because you have to be able to provide some level of water, you can't go in and say, okay, for this price, we're going to give you partially clean water, and for this ultimate price, you get the clean. Everyone gets the same water. And so there's not a lot of room for extracting any extra money out of that system. And so what happens, they get it. I think they probably underestimated the bad condition of the water infrastructure, and that's true in many East Coast cities, and couldn't make the investments. And so the whole system started falling apart. And as I mentioned in the article, there's just numerous examples throughout the country of cash-strapped water agencies in cities bringing in privatizers and finding that it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. It doesn't supply clean water, and it doesn't maintain the infrastructure.
It's interesting because my sense, and I don't know if this is the case, but what we witnessed and what we're, I guess, sort of continually witnessing in Detroit is these rapid increases in the price of water, the water rates, the attempts to cut people off from their water. There's some who have speculated, or maybe it's not even that much of a secret, that the idea is the city raises the rates so it becomes more attractive to private entities, so they can come in and make some money off it. I mean, how does something like that play into this?
Well, I mean, Detroit is its own case. There's just the state of the budget there. And so what's happened is they let it go for a long time because people couldn't afford to pay their water bill. And again, so they would raise the rate, and people see, oh, this is too much. I'm not paying it. They didn't shut people off, and so literally they could not afford to supply water and sewage service, and had to start doing this. So I don't know if it was a deliberate attempt to make it more attractive for privatization, as much as just, you could only give water the free ride for so long before it catches up to you.
Indeed. And so, in terms of this question of privatizing companies coming in and not realizing or not being prepared to make the infrastructure investments in this. I mean, it's just on some levels, I guess it's sort of a classic case of there are just some jobs that are too big and too, I guess, important in terms of the delivery of the service for it to be functional in private hands.
Right, exactly. And even, when Atlanta did upgrade its infrastructure, I think they had something like 158, don't quote me, I don't know the exact number, but an astronomical increase in water bills to support that. And I think that's what you're going to see in city after city if we don't have some kind of federal infrastructure bank that cities can call upon. Their only choice is going to be do it by raising rates. And so, the day when water is practically a free good is going to be over very soon. It already is.
Joan Fitzgerald, Professor Urban and Public Policy at the School for Public Policy and Urban Affairs at Northeastern University. The piece is Why Markets Can't Price the Priceless in the American Prospects. I guess it's part of their report, What the Free Market Can't Do. Thanks so much for your time today, Joan.